Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch this training. This training is FAFSA Fundamentals Preparing for the Application. My name is Natasha Garfield. I'm the Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid at the Denver Scholarship Foundation, and I'll be talking with you today about how to support students and families to get ready to apply for financial aid. Our objectives for today are to help students and families determine which financial aid application to complete, know how to identify whether a student will be considered dependent or independent for purposes of financial aid, understand who will need to provide information on the application, and be prepared to support students and parents with creating the necessary accounts. Here's our agenda for today. We'll talk about how you determine whether a student will complete FAFSA or CASFA. Then we'll talk about, you'll figure out whose information will need to be included on the application. We'll also talk in this section about what application will be needed. Once you've figured out who will be providing information on the FAFSA or CASFA, we'll talk about what needs to happen to create the appropriate accounts. And then we will close by summarizing this session and give a quick preview of what we will cover in Fundamentals Part 2. Remember, when you're working with a student or family on a financial aid application, you want to really encourage them to take the time to read each question and ask if they're unsure about how to answer. Many of the questions on financial aid applications include technical terms, financial terms, tax terms that most of us are not using in our day-to-day lives. So we don't want to make any assumptions about how a particular person should be answering those questions unless they have had a chance to read it carefully and talk it over with you or with someone else they trust. So our first step is to work with students to figure out which application they're going to complete. In Colorado, we are fortunate that we have an application for everyone. So students will either be completing the Colorado application for state financial aid, or CASFA, or they will complete the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA. What's important to know about these two applications is that FAFSA is an application that gives students access to both federal, state, and institutional aid. Federal aid is aid that comes from the U.S. government, so that would include Pell Grants as well as student loans. And state aid can include the Colorado State Grant. Institutional aid refers to aid that is offered by the student's college. The CASFA is an application that allows students to access state and institutional aid only. So it does not provide access to federal aid. For this reason, students who are eligible for federal aid will generally complete the FAFSA, and the students who will be completing CASFA in general will be students who are not eligible for federal aid. It's important to remember that the CASFA is only used by Colorado institutions and generally only by public colleges in Colorado. So if a student who's not eligible for federal aid is applying to out-of-state colleges or Colorado private institutions, they need to check with that college about how they will access financial aid. There are some situations where parents whose student is eligible for federal aid may have concerns about how their data will be shared when they're completing the FAFSA. We do have more information available about how to work with families in that situation. We have that in our virtual financial aid binder, which we will share at the end of this training, and we will also be covering it further in later trainings. For purposes of today, the way that we use the infographic that you see on your screen is we generally will talk with students about these two categories of students. students who are eligible for federal aid, and students who are not. So generally, for a student to be eligible for federal aid, they need to be a US citizen, or they are what is considered an eligible non-citizen. That's actually defined in the law. And that includes US permanent residents. Those would be people who have a green card or permanent resident card, or students who have an I-94. That's a type of immigration document that shows that they are a refugee, they have been approved for asylum, or they fit into one of the other categories that is shown on the screen. Students who are not eligible for federal aid are going to be any student who's not a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. They can qualify for Colorado in-state tuition as well as state financial aid if they meet the requirements for Colorado Asset, which are shown on the screen. Those apply to any person regardless of their immigration status. And they are, if the person has attended a Colorado high school for at least a year before graduation and have been physically present in Colorado for at least 12 months before starting college. So that is students who might have DACA, that is students who are undocumented, as well as students with any immigration status if they are seeking only Colorado state and institutional aid. We're going to give you a moment here to pause. You can pause the video if you'd like, and think about what are some questions that you could ask a student to determine whether they should complete the FAFSA or CASFA application. Please keep in mind that immigration status can be a very sensitive topic for many students and families, so it's important to use inclusive language and show that you are here to support them regardless of their status. It's also important here to emphasize to the families that you're working with that there is an application for everyone in Colorado. So even if they are not eligible for federal aid, they still have a path to receiving financial support for college. All right, hopefully you had a moment to think of some questions that you might ask students or families when figuring out which application they'll complete. Here are some ideas from Denver Scholarship Foundation. The place that we usually like to start is to share that CASFA FAFSA infographic that we just talked through and ask the student to reflect on which application fits their situation. If they're not sure based on looking over those lists, and they may not be because it's pretty technical, complex immigration status language, then some questions to explore are, where were you born? Students who were born in the US will be eligible for federal aid. Students who were born in other countries may be eligible for federal aid, so you'll have to ask some additional questions to figure that out. You can also ask the student if they have a Social Security number or card. You can ask whether their card says that it's valid for work only or has other restrictions. If they don't have a Social Security number, do they have a green card? And if they don't know the answers to those questions, which sometimes they may not as teenagers, they can try asking their parents. Another question to ask is, how long have you lived in Colorado? And the reason that you might ask that is because it helps to figure out whether they're going to be eligible for in-state tuition and state financial aid. You may be wondering, why would we ask students whether they have a Social Security number, or SSN for short? Sometimes students don't actually know whether they're US citizens, legal permanent residents, or if they might fit into one of the categories of eligible non-citizens. Asking about whether they have a Social Security number can help to figure out whether they're going to be eligible for federal aid. If they don't have a Social Security number, that generally means they're not going to be eligible for federal aid unless they can confirm that they have a green card or they've been approved as a refugee or have been granted asylum status. If they have a Social Security number, but their card says that it's valid for work only, in general, that means that they're not going to be eligible for federal aid, so they would want to complete the CASFA instead. They have a social security number, their card doesn't have any restrictions. Generally speaking, that means that they will be eligible for federal aid regardless of where they were born, and they should complete the FAFSA. We have a variety of resources in the virtual financial aid binder if you're not sure how to interpret a student's immigration status and the student themselves is not sure. Once you've determined which application the student is going to complete, the next step is to figure out who will be a contributor, who is going to provide information on the student's FAFSA. In order to do that, you first need to determine, is the student going to be considered dependent or independent for FAFSA or CASFA purposes? If a student is considered dependent, it means that they will need to provide their parents information on their financial aid application. If they are independent, they will complete the application without parent information. Most students under age 24 will need to provide parent information on their FAFSA or CASFA. This is true even if the parent does not financially support them or claim them on their taxes. FAFSA and CASFA want to know about the family's financial situation for most students, and that what they are not interested in whether that parent is going to be providing support for college. When students are completing either application, FAFSA or CASFA, they are going to see a list of questions that we'll talk about next. Those are really helpful in determining whether a student who's under age 24 will be considered a dependent. One thing that's important to keep in mind here is that dependency can be really confusing for practitioners, for students, and for families, because dependency as it's used for FAFSA and CASFA isn't always the same as being considered a dependent on taxes. This is the list of questions that students will see when they are completing their financial aid application. The way it appears on the forms is that there'll be a check mark next to each of these questions, a checkbox. And if the answer to the question is yes, then the student will check the box. If the student checks any of those boxes, they will be considered independent. If they do not check any boxes, they'll see one at the end that says none of these apply, and then they will be considered a dependent student. In most cases, other than age, marital status, or working towards a master's or doctorate degree, the student is going to need to follow up with the financial aid office after they complete their FAFSA or CASFA, because they'll need to provide some additional documentation to show that one of these categories applies to them. For example, if a student is in a legal guardianship, they will need to provide a copy of the court order determining that they had a legal guardian appointed in order to confirm their independent status for financial aid. Once you've determined whether the student will be considered dependent for FAFSA or CASFA, then the next step is figuring out who will be a contributor. The word contributor, as it's used on FAFSA and CASFA, means anyone who is required to provide information on the financial aid application and must provide consent to release their tax information to federal student aid. For the CASFA, it means anyone who's required to provide information on the application and share information about their finances and income. The possible contributors are the student's parent or parents, a step-parent if that person is married to the student's parent, or the student's spouse if applicable. The student's legal guardian, so a legal guardian other than their biological or adoptive parent, is never going to be a contributor on the form unless they have legally adopted the student. Federal student aid has a great tool that helps families walk through the decision of who needs to be a contributor on the student's FAFSA. This tool can be used whether the student is completing FAFSA or CASFA. It doesn't require a login, and it really is just helping to figure out who is the right parent or parents to provide information on the form. So what you see on the screen right now is the first step, which is asking about the first names of the student's legal parents. And again, the legal parent is going to be either a biological or adoptive parent. Next up, the form asks, are parent one and parent two married to each other? If the answer is yes, then both parents will be including information on the FAFSA. If the answer is no, they're not married to each other, then the next question is, do they live together? Again, if they answer yes, then both will provide information on the form. If the answer is no, they don't live together, then the next question asks, which parent has provided more financial support for the student over the past 12 months? There may be some situations where parents claim that they provide an equal amount of financial support for the student. And if that's true, you can see the instruction here on the slide that they will then use the parent who has the higher income and assets to complete the FAFSA. Once you figure out whether it will be parent one or parent two who has provided more financial support, then the next question is, did that parent remarry? If the answer is yes, the parent is remarried, then the step parent or parent spouse will also be including their information on the FAFSA, even if they don't provide any financial support for the student. The reason for that is the forms really want to know about what is the financial picture in the household. And so they do require information from the step parent as well as the biological or adoptive parent. Finally, at the end, the family will receive a response about which parent is going to be considered the parent contributor for the FAFSA or CASFA form, and also will tell them that the parent spouse needs to include information as well. So this can be really helpful as a quick way to figure out who needs to get their information ready and have an account for completing the FAFSA or CASFA. We also have this flow chart available, which asks the same questions as the parent wizard that we just went through, but might be easier if you're not sitting in front of a screen. You can have a printout of this, and you can help the family to walk through it to figure out who will be a contributor. Next, we're going to quickly talk about what information is needed from contributors. There's a more comprehensive list in the virtual binder, including a handout called What to Bring for FAFSA or CASFA that you can send home with students to help them get ready and help their families prepare with all the information that they need. First thing they'll need is tax returns for the most recent tax filing year. So for this fall 2025, that will be 2024 tax returns. If the family hasn't filed taxes yet, you want to check to see whether they were required to file. We have a resource for that in the binder. And if they were required to file because their income was above the tax filing threshold, they should get those taxes filed as soon as possible because it will be necessary in order to complete the financial aid process. If they haven't filed yet, they can still move forward. They can use W-2s to estimate their tax information, and then they'll just need to follow up once they've gotten their taxes filed. They'll also want to have information about their financial assets available. That includes any child support that was received in the past year, as well as their current balance of cash, checking, and savings accounts. They'll also be asked about any federal means-tested benefits. That means benefits where they are based on the person's income. That includes things like SNAP, which is another name for food stamps, or Medicaid. It's important to keep in mind that one of the types of federal means-tested benefits is free and reduced lunch, but in Colorado, free lunch is available to all students. So students should not check that box unless they have actually completed the free and reduced lunch application form and had that confirmed. So in general, if they receive other means tested benefits, they'll say yes to those, but not to free and reduced lunch if they are in Colorado. All right, we are now going to do some practice to determine who will be the contributors in 3 scenarios. Important thing to keep in mind is that we are just going to think through these, but if you were working with a student who is in any of these situations, you could use the parent wizard or the parent flowchart to help figure out who the contributors will be. I'm going to give you a moment if you'd like to pause the video to read this over and think through who you think the contributors will be for each scenario, and then we'll review them together. All right, so scenario A, Jose's parents are divorced. His mom remarried when Jose was 13. He lives with his mom and step-parent during the week and spends time with his dad on weekends. His mom pays for his cell phone bill and most other expenses. So in this scenario, it is Jose's mom and step-parent who will be the contributors. The analysis here is, are Jose's parents married to each other? No, they're not. They are divorced. Do they live together? No, they do not. And then who provides more financial support? Obviously, you have a limited amount of information here, but if Jose is living with his mom during the week, and his mom is paying for his cell phone and most other expenses, then we can assume for purposes of this scenario that mom is providing more financial support. So she will be the parent who contributes on the FAFSA or CASFA. And then as far as the next question, that will be, has mom remarried? And based on the information here, yes, she is remarried and she is living with her with the step parent. So both of them will be contributors. All right, moving on to scenario B. In this scenario, Sam's biological parents never married, but they live together. So the first question will be, are parent 1 and parent 2 married to each other? The answer is no. But the next question is, do they live together? And the answer is yes. Because they live together, it doesn't matter whether or not they are married. All that matters is that they are in the same household, which means that they will both provide information on the FAFSA. If they file taxes together, only one parent actually needs to create an account, but that parent will be reporting information for both parents. And then finally, scenario C. In this scenario, Ray has lived with their aunt since they were 3 years old, and their aunt is their legal guardian. They don't have any contact with their biological parents. Here, the key piece of information is that Ray's aunt is their legal guardian. Because of that, Ray will be independent and will not provide any parent information on the FAFSA or CASFA. Ray's aunt will not be a contributor. Ray will need to follow up and provide proof of the legal guardianship to the financial aid office. That is going to be a court order confirming that the legal guardianship was approved by the court. What's important to keep in mind here is that the legal guardian will never be a contributor unless they legally adopted the student. And it is important that there is legal paperwork from a court about the guardianship. If it's a more informal arrangement, that will not be handled through this part of the process. And we will talk more about what students would do if they live with someone other than their parents, but that person is not a legal guardian in the next training. So once you have determined which application the student will complete and figured out whether they will be dependent or independent and who will be required to provide information on their application, the next step will be to create an account. We're going to talk first about FAFSA and then talk about what is different for the CASFA. For the FAFSA, all contributors, anyone who's required to provide information on the form, is going to be required to create their own account. That allows them to report their information, provide consent to share tax information, and electronically sign the FAFSA. They may have an existing account. Many parents will have an account from when they themselves were a student, or they may have already created one because they have an older child who has already been through the FAFSA process. If they've already created an account, they will continue to use it, even if they may have forgotten their password or what email they used to create it. There are lots of resources available about how to recover an existing account if that's necessary. Two-parent households, so parents, if both biological or adoptive parents still live together and they're filing joint taxes, only one of them will need a student aid account. However, for two-parent households where they don't file joint taxes, either because they file as married filing separately, or they are not married and so they file singly, in that situation, both parents will need to create their own studentaid.gov accounts. The information that is required is full name, exactly as it appears on any government-issued documents. So that includes the spacing, the spelling, any hyphens, all needs to be exactly the same. Their date of birth, social security number, which is required for all students, but not required for parents or spouses if they don't have one, and their current address. In addition, they need to provide either an email or a mobile phone number that can be used to verify their account, and it needs to be one that hasn't been used for another studentaid.gov account. So a parent can't use their student's email when they're creating their FAFSA account. Each person who creates an account will need to verify either their phone or email. That's part of the security steps for multi-factor authentication. We encourage students and parents to verify both email and phone whenever possible, because that just maximizes their options for getting logged in later. As I mentioned, students do need to have a social security number in order to create their studentaid.gov account. If they don't have one, that's totally okay, but that just means they'll complete the CASFA instead of FAFSA. There is an exception to that if the student is from a freely associated state, but we rarely see that here in Colorado. Parents and spouses, however, do not need to have a social security number. So the screenshots that you're seeing now show you what this flow looks like. They will see the blank to fill in a social security number. If they don't have one, they'll need to click where it says, "What if I don't have a social security number?" And that will provide additional details about the circumstances where you can move forward without an SSN. They will check a box to confirm that they do not have a social security number. And then once they check that box and move on to the next screen, they are going to see this screen that says, "Warning, you must enter an SSN if you have one." And then it explains again that they are confirming by moving forward without a social security number that they do not in fact have one. Once they confirm, "I don't have a social security number," then they will continue on with the account creation process. Everyone who creates a FSA account or studentaid.gov account will be required to choose a username, a password. There are some pretty specific prompts about what those need to include. They'll choose how they want to receive communications from federal student aid, and then they'll have to answer a series of challenge questions. We have a form that students can use to keep track of those answers. If they want to do that, what a lot of students will do is take photos of their screen as they're going through the process so that they know which challenge questions they picked and what the answers were, if they ever need to use them to get access to their account. You already mentioned that federal student aid uses multi-factor authentication, so they'll have to verify either their email or phone, or they can use an authenticator app if that's something that they already feel comfortable with. And then the next step is that there is an identity match, which will happen through the Social Security Administration if an SSN was provided. For users without an SSN, they will answer some knowledge-based identity questions. What's important to know is that there have been some recent changes. There used to be a delay in that Social Security Administration match, but that has been eliminated. So the match will happen in real time for users with Social Security numbers. And then what's also important to know is for any users who answer those knowledge-based identity questions because they don't have Social Security numbers, there is currently a hold on the process to require identity validation if they don't have their identity confirmed through those knowledge-based questions. So we will provide lots more information if that changes, but right now their account will just be verified after they see the knowledge-based questions. As I mentioned, account validation should now happen immediately for users with Social Security numbers. What they will see after their identity has been verified is the message that you see on your screen. Your account has been successfully created and your personal information has been verified with the Social Security Administration. If they get a message saying that there wasn't a match with the Social Security Administration, that is a good indication that they probably mistyped their social. So they should follow up right away to correct it, because that can cause some delays and complications in the process. And it's something that it's much easier to take care of it right away. All right, now we are going to turn our attention to what it looks like for students to create a CASFA login. Before we dive into this, I want to mention that this is being recorded in August of 2025. The CASFA, or Colorado Application for State Financial Aid, is in the process of moving to a new software platform. From August 31st to September 8th, 2025, the CASFA will be offline while that transition is happening. And so there are a few things that we're going to be talking about right now that may be changing. So we will provide updated information once we know more. Student accounts for CASFA can be created on the CASFA website. The easiest way for students to get there is to search CASFA Colorado in their web browser. We have provided the link to the landing page for the CASFA here, but it is quite a lot to type, so that's why we recommend searching in a web browser instead. This is a simple account that requires just an email address and password for creation. It does not include the types of verification steps that folks have to complete for federal student aid. It is important that students use a valid email address when they're creating their account, so we highly recommend that they use a personal email like a Gmail account rather than a DPS or other school emails, since those will be deactivated when they graduate from high school. Right now, the parent account creation process is being updated, so we don't have details about what that's going to look like going forward, but we, again, will follow up with that information once it's available from the Colorado Department of Higher Education. We provide an account creation flyer that I mentioned that is available in the virtual binder and will be shared with this recording. We recommend, if you are interested in seeing what that's like, take a moment to pause here and try filling it out for yourself, both for the CASFA and FAFSA, just so you know what students and families can expect as they're going through that process. All right, we have come to the end of our time together, so I want to do a quick review of the steps that students will complete as they are preparing to apply for financial aid. So step 1, they'll decide which application to complete, FAFSA or CASFA. Step 2 will be figuring out who needs to provide information. So that's first answering the question of, is the student considered dependent or independent for financial aid? Then they will figure out who will be their parent contributors if they're required to have one or two. And remember, only the student, their legal parents, biological or adoptive, and the student's spouse or parent's spouse will ever be included on the application. So grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, legal guardians, none of those people are ever going to report information on FAFSA or CASFA unless they have legally adopted the student. And then step 3 will be to create accounts for any required FAFSA contributors or create a student account if the student is completing the CASFA. In closing, we invite you to take a few moments to write down a brief summary for yourself of each section covered in this training and reflect on any remaining questions you might have. In our next training, which we call Financial Aid Fundamentals Part 2, Completing the Applications, we will be going over a step-by-step approach to completing both FAFSA and CASFA and understanding the other steps that students need to complete in order to make sure that they receive financial aid for college. Do want to encourage everyone to check out the virtual financial aid binder, which I've mentioned throughout this session. We'll also share the link in follow-up resources, but we just want to emphasize that we have many, many different tools there, both things that you can use in working directly with students and family or for your own information if there's a topic that you want to learn more about. The binder does include a table of contents, which has links to all of the different resources included within it, and can also be easily searched if you're looking for a particular topic like taxes. That'll take you right to the information that you need. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again at one of our future trainings.